So this video isn't any attack on the medical field. The field is way too large for me to say that every doctor, every nurse is corrupt, because that would be a fallacy. However, I am dedicated and strictly committed to homeopathic everything, natural and organic everything. And this is based off of my experience. And this is also the reason why I am so against narcotics. And even though pharmaceutical drugs are prescribed, so everybody thinks it's okay to use, but when you do your research, you'll find out that they're just as bad as street drugs, and I say stay away from them. So I was diagnosed with an acute form of sickle cell anemia when I was a little girl, and under the guidance of my mother, I didn't really have too many challenges. My mother was very particular with the way that she fed us. Everything was organic by the time I came around. And my mornings looked like, raw oatmeal and apples and walnuts and, orange juice, fresh squeezed, nothing but, water. Always had the vitamins every single morning. That's what my youth looked like. And so under her care, I didn't have challenges. And especially as a prepubescent, I don't remember having, joint pain or extreme weakness or fatigue. But when puberty hit, things changed. And my cycle every month would drain my energy more, I think more than other girls. The pain and the cramps that I would get every single month was just like excruciating. I remember when it first happened, I was always really athletic, and there were times that my cramps were so unbearable, I felt like I couldn't even make it through lacrosse practice or field hockey practice. I just remember having like these very excruciating periods growing up. And I just maybe, assumed, not really putting everything together, that it was probably just the luck of the draw. Some people get periods worse than others. And it didn't happen until high school that the pains became worse. And I had an incident when it was my senior year of high school, actually. And basically it was a captain's run, a 4-mile run before practice. And every single day I just remember these pains getting so bad. It wasn't just, pains in my stomach, it was pains in my leg, specifically my left leg. And it was from the sole of my foot that would shoot up all the way into my calf. And these pains were excruciating. They were unbearable. And so I remember one day, lacrosse practice, and we were going for a run, and the pains got so sharp this particular day. Now prior to this day, I was going to the trainer's office, and I would leave class like a couple minutes early to go to the trainer's office, and they would wrap my foot with tape. And at first it helped a little bit, but it really didn't have any like long-term aid in these excruciating pains. So this particular day, the pains got so unbearable that I couldn't even walk. I couldn't run, and I couldn't even walk anymore. I'm laying in the middle of the forest, basically, because where I grew up, it's all forests and trees and mountains. And our runs would be like through these, like, kind of like, I guess you could say, like a cross-country situation. Our runs would be through these trees, like we would go through these long routes. And I'm in the middle of like this forest, and I'm on my knees, and I'm like curled up in fetal position, just crying. because I literally could not move my body. The pain was that severe. And eventually they found me. And of course, they had to call my mom. She had to leave work to come get me. And I remember her just being so worried. Like, I'd received these shots a few weeks before. It's mandatory that, at the time it was mandatory that you get TB shots if you want to go into athletics. And so you have to get like these tuberculosis shots or whatever. So I got my TB shot just weeks before. And I remember my mom just wondering, like, I wonder, like, because at this point I'd been under her guidance and under her household, and she knew that, I wasn't doing any crazy, I wasn't doing any like heavy drugs, or wasn't doing, we ate like very organic, like we ate very clean. And so she just kept wondering, she's like, I wonder if it was the shot, I wonder if it was related to like her having the shot, like an adverse reaction to this TB shot. And she tried her best. She did everything: a hot bath, an ice bath, cold water, ice, everything, all night, and I was just crying, because the pain was just so bad. I couldn't walk, nothing. And so eventually she had no choice but to bring me to the hospital. And in my mind, it was just something that they were going to like maybe just give me like something to take, and I was going to go right home. That was the goal. Like, I had no idea when I got to the hospital that day what was going to happen. I just thought, okay, I'll go back to school tomorrow morning. I'll feel better. My pain will be gone, and I'll be back in lacrosse practice tomorrow afternoon. That was my thought. I had no clue that that would be like, I would not be home for another month. Like, that night would be the first night of almost a month of me in the hospital, spending the night every night in the hospital. So they tell me that they need to do more testing. They send me through an MRI, they scan my body, and they found that something was very abnormal with my left leg. Something was going on internally with my left leg. And when they looked further into the x-rays, they saw that muscle tissue had died in my left leg. And again, I'm big on wellness, as far as a lifestyle. But up until this point, it's the senior year of high school, I wasn't doing anything more than, the occasional Zima or whatever the wine coolers were, at the time. I was not into anything crazy. Like, I couldn't understand how I'd eaten so well and my mom was taking such good care of me, and why this was happening. And they attributed it to my sickle cell anemia trait. And they basically said that with my severe anemia, that it could have been like some sort of blood clot. Something was preventing oxygen from going throughout my body. And that was the reason why so much muscle tissue had died. So they said, we're going to have to operate on your leg to get this tissue out, because if we don't get this tissue out, the outcome could be very severe. And so it was just week after week, just surgeries. I ended up, throughout the duration of the like 3.5 weeks that I was in the hospital, I ended up having 6 surgeries and 7 blood transfusions. And I would just be sleeping all the time. I would just sleep all day. And they put me under extremely heavy narcotics, MS Cotton, Oxycontin, just extreme sedatives, because like morphine, basically, like, I was told at one point that one of the drugs that they were giving me was like a mild form of heroin. Like, I'm like, why do the hospitals like give these people these drugs? And I'm 17 years old, had never touched a drug in my life. And imagine just being pumped with drugs like 24/7, and you're just laying there damn near lifeless. Just because they couldn't, operate on me with um, me being conscious, or me not having, some sort of sedative. And it was bad. It was really bad. I feel as if, even though, and I'll show you guys the scar, even though I have these scars, see that scar right there? I got that big scar right there. And then I have another one on the other side of this leg. And this leg is actually somewhat disfigured. It's not as bad as it used to be because I ended up having an additional surgery. But it's not, this calf is not the same size as the other calf muscle. So I guess you could say I'm technically disabled, like technically, but maybe it's my pride. I never saw myself as a disabled or ill person. But anyways, this was the outcome of 6 surgeries within, 3.5 weeks. They had a new device called the wound vacuum, and they hooked me up to this new device. And I believe that I was somewhat of a test dummy for this new device because the wound vacuum ended up malfunctioning. And I remember waking up, one day, I would sleep all the time with these drugs. And it was probably midday because I remember looking outside of the window and the sun was out, but I was so heavily sedated that I wouldn't even know what day it was, what time it was, none of that. And I looked outside the window. I remember the sunlight, but I couldn't really feel any sensation because they had me so drugged up. I just remember feeling a little bit of discomfort and looking down and seeing blood everywhere. There was blood all over the hospital bed sheets, dripping down onto the floor, just puddles of blood. And basically, this wound vacuum that they hooked me up to malfunctioned. And so I remember, just being like panicking and hitting that red button for the nurse to come. Um, but it was very, very traumatic, and I literally have had both long-term and short-term effects of this hospitalization. I had a catheter in my I think urethra for almost 4 months. And so I've had, adversity, like with just, my urinary tract has been like all damaged because of these operations and the amount of time that I had to have a catheter inside of me. And I had the chance to really witness how things, went in the hospitals. And, I got a lot of information about the way that, the nurses worked and all of these things. And throughout the duration of my time, I probably lost a good 15, 20 pounds. I ended up being like 100 pounds, 105 pounds. I was just really skinny because I couldn't eat because of the drugs that they had me on. And they told me that likely I was going to have to walk with at least a walker or a cane to get my high school diploma. But I had a really wonderful nurse who would come after I was released from the hospital. She would come and she would, undress my wounds. And basically I had like this huge open sore, like this big gash on my left leg that would bleed a lot. And so she would have to take the bandages off, and then she would pour saline on top of the wound, and then she would re-wrap the wound. And I have a skin graft that was taken from the top of my left leg because the operations, they had cut so deep that they weren't just going to be able to stitch up my calf again. So they had to take skin from the top of my left thigh to close it up. And I just remember, feeling really strong because I went from a wheelchair, leaving the hospital where I couldn't walk at all, and within a month or so after being bedridden at home, I remember taking my first steps with my walker. And I was homeschooled, so every day my mom would have to stop and grab my homework from my school teachers, and I was able to do my work, even on all the drugs they had me on, because of course the pain didn't stop when I went home. So they had my mom monitor like all of the drugs that I was taking, the Oxycontin, and all of the sedatives, but we would carve out time for me to be able to get my work done, in between me sleeping. Because I remember just sleeping a lot. Just, you take those drugs and you just go to sleep. But we would carve out time in between me sleeping for me to get my homework done, for me to get it to my school teachers by the end of the week. And I graduated high school on time. And I went, from a wheelchair. I remember taking my first steps in a walker. And from a walker, I remember having crutches. And the first time everybody saw me, I was on crutches. And they're like, wow, Kinza, we haven't seen you in so long. Some of my close friends stopped by to pay me a visit, but it was a beautiful experience seeing my school friends again. And they said likely, and I just remember them saying that you're going to have to walk across stage with a cane, but it's okay. We're going to give you a cool cane. Maybe we'll decorate the cane, The nurse was very optimistic, and she was like, I've seen it where kids will have their friends sign the cane, and things like that. And I was strong enough where I was able to receive my high school diploma, and I actually didn't have to walk across the stage with a cane. And so I say this to say that a lot of people see me as, strong, maybe unrelatable to some extent, because I believe that this experience made me abnormal. Having a disability made me abnormal. And then the long-term effects of these drugs where, my cognitive ability is not the same. And like, sometimes things are just switched in my mind. So I think like right is left and left is right. It's just been a lot of different things since I was like on these heavy drugs. And even my athletic ability, I'm very athletic, but my body doesn't function the same as it did. My equilibrium is off, my balance is off. So I'll have to do like a lot of work with like yoga work, where I'll stand on one leg for a minute to try and regain balance. It's still a challenge for me. And so I was talking to my mother, and she was having a conversation with a relative who was basically saying that, wow, Kinza's so brilliant, so talented, why hasn't she reached the level of accomplishments that I feel like she's deserving of? And the truth is, it's pride, to a large extent, because I don't like to ask for help. I have it ingrained in my mind that, saying that you have a disability is a weakness. Asking for help is a weakness. Anything that's not strong is a weakness. But I have challenges. I have a physical disability, and I have mental problems from the side effects of a lot of the drugs that they put me on at that time. And going to college at that time was a challenge. Straight from being bedridden and having a catheter and being on all these drugs, going straight to college in the Midwest on my own, and I was too ashamed to tell my friends what happened. I never wore shorts or never showed my scars. None of my friends even knew that I had surgery because I was embarrassed. Like, I looked at it like a weakness, like I was ashamed. So nobody knew, to this day, I don't think my college friends knew that I just learned how to rewalk right before I went away to school. And so, all of these things like affected my self-esteem, and it affected my balance, my physical balance and my mental balance. It affected a lot of things. And my grades weren't awesome. My grades were not great. and I struggled through school because I just had this like new disability, and I didn't get the proper amount of physical therapy, and I didn't get any like mental therapy for this situation. Um, and so, I've kind of struggled through life, like handling this disability, and it's definitely drawing challenges when it comes to work. Um, I do take care of myself a lot better than I used to, as far as just like my diet and everything like that. But my memory, I believe that these drugs do affect your memory, short term and long term. So, assignments that required me to have like a lot of like remembering things really, a lot, was always kind of a challenge for me. And I say all this to say that I'm just like everybody else that has challenges. I'm not a superwoman by any stretch of the imagination. I've overcome quite a bit. I believe that because of my adversity, my current state of strength can be somewhat intimidating to people, and it was inevitable. Um, and then I've attracted partners who have made me stronger as well. I raised my kid, pretty much on my own. I've had, no child support um, my entire life. And so, thank God, thank my mother also, who's helped out with him. But I've been the sole parent for my son. And so all of these collections of circumstances and adverse situations have made me very, 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 very strong. Strong to the point where I feel like unrelatable. Um, and I get it, you know what I mean? I see people, and I guess a part of my heart goes to people with disabilities that it's far more apparent. And you see them, and they're kind of like ostracized at school, or like looked at as like weird, because of their disabilities. And I relate to that a lot. I relate to people who are disabled and have physical and mental challenges a lot. And so, yes, to some degree, I've felt very ostracized by my disabilities, but I feel like the gem in everything is me relating to people who most people can't relate to. Um, this has also made me very anti-drugs, very, 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 very anti-drugs, drugs, period, because I know this how severely they mess with your mind, but pharmaceutical drugs especially, because these doctors prescribe these drugs, and because it is socially acceptable and it's just a part of society, oh, I was diagnosed with this, or I have this kind of pain or whatever. People start popping pills, and we have a lot of people who are addicts, and it's so easy. It's so easy to develop an addiction to a prescription drug because the doctors prescribe it. But I'm telling you that these drugs have such bad side effects, long-term and short-term side effects. And even though I'm years removed from them, forcing me to take all of these drugs in the hospital, to this day, I'm affected by it. And so this has really helped me birth my desire to go into the health and wellness field from a homeopathic, organic standpoint. I'm very against, I'm not going to say I'm against the medical industry, but the traditional medical industry having my situation, and not, I was 17, but I wasn't, considered an adult. So I didn't have really the choice. And if I could do it all over, I would have never had them operate on me. I would have probably found homeopathic solution to the problem. And it's not just vanity because of these scars. It's really the long-term effects of the drugs and everything that I went through that I realized was such a detriment to my life and has become such a hindrance to me, like obtaining the success that I wanted and just really getting through a lot of these challenges. To me, in hindsight, it's just not worth it. And especially when I do research and I find out that there's homeopathic remedies to like sickle cell anemia, and there's things that you can do to oxygenate yourself. There's hyperbaric chambers. Like there's other solutions that don't require them cutting into your flesh and like basically just like dissecting you. And I felt like in hindsight, like I felt like I was a science experiment. I felt like, the wound vacuum malfunctioned and a lot of things didn't go as planned with the surgery. They told my whole family they were going to have to amputate my leg. I felt like I felt like a social experiment, on my body. And this is a body that I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. And if I could choose again, I was 17, but if I could choose again, I would have never, ever put no MS cotton and none of those prescription drugs that they gave me and the morphine that they had me hooked on an IV with. I would have never opted. I would have dealt with the pain because the long-term effects are just, it's not worth it. So this is the reason why I've gravitated towards health and wellness, because there are so many people dealing with so many different types of challenges, and it could be disabilities that are seen, disabilities that people cannot see, mental health challenges, clinical depression. There's so many conditions that that people are dealing with right now. And being on both sides, I know that yoga, sunlight, meditation, good food, staying alcohol free, drug free, really taking care of your body has been definitely more effective than any sort of pill that you could pop. And so I say this to say, I am relaunching my social media. I don't have too many people that watch these videos or listen to the things that I have to say. But in the spirit of vulnerability, I would love to have people's advice, and I would love to also have people's stories about challenges that you've overcome, be they physical challenges, mental health challenges, whatever challenges you've overcome. I would love to hear your story. I'm going to post my email address below, and I would love to be able to serve as an advisor on natural remedies for some of your challenges. And I'm no doctor, I'm no certified health professional. I'm certified in Reiki. That's about it. And I am, I do help heal. I'm helping heal myself currently. But I want to let you know that I'm not, licensed or whatever. But I think that we could come together and come up with better solutions to escaping some of these pharmaceutical drugs. And I'm not going to trash the pharmaceutical companies, but these are like licensed legal pushers. Like these are like licensed legal like drug dealers, And the fact is, what people don't know behind the scenes is that they have like these very sexy women, alluring women come to these medical offices, and they will basically take the whole staff out to these like elaborate like 4-course meal, dinners to these beautiful restaurants. And during the restaurant experience, they're pushing that drug. You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's basically drug dealing, but like allowed within our country. And I'm very anti-pharmaceutical. I'm very anti the way that they do it. It's very sneaky the way they go about it. And so I also want some help from you guys on tidbits. How do I grow my social media? How can you help me develop this health and wellness brand? And if there's anybody who has specialized in health and wellness, please reach out. I'm going to post my email below. And I'm going to let you know a little bit more about how everything is going with me developing my health and wellness brand. Peace.